Hey, what's up guys? It's Blake with Whitewater Reptiles, and today we're going to talk about the 5 biggest scams that pet stores will pull on you. Now, the most common thing I'll see happen in a pet shop, a big chain store for example, such as PetSmart or Petco, is to label little guys as fancy animals, meaning that they're just not a normal. Well, my problem with that is that could be, in terms of ball pythons, could be simply a pastel ball python, or that could be a banana ball python. Either one of those, they're going to charge you that set premium price for. However, a pastel is worth significantly less than a banana ball python. Or it could be a pastel ball python and a pastel pinstripe Enchi ball python. Same price. They're both fancy ball pythons. And that is just not a fair way to price those animals. Another example of fancy reptiles you'll see in a place like PetSmart will be with leopard geckos. Now you'll see a guy like this here, he could be a normal, and maybe they're going to charge you $60, and they're going to have a fancy, maybe it's $100. Now, a fancy could be something like a Max Snow, it could be something like a Super Hypo Carrot Tail. A lot of times I'll see Max Snows in the normal enclosure as well as the fancy enclosure with a $60 price tag and a $100 price tag. What I'm getting at is they don't even know what they're selling you. It's just from the supplier. So you could be paying a $40 difference for the exact same animal. Now, the biggest problem I have with this normal versus fancy debacle is crested geckos. My reason for that is they do not know the lineage on the animals that they have in these chain pet stores. So they really have no idea what they have with these crested geckos, since crested geckos' genetics are a little bit different than the other reptiles we typically deal with. And what I mean by that is, if you don't know what the adults look like, then you probably don't know what those hatchlings are going to look like, so they're basing it off of what these babies look like. And what's funny about that is very often you'll go in there and you'll see these normal hatchlings look better than the fancy variants of them in these pet stores. But they're charging you an extra $60 or $100 or whatever they might be charging for these fancy versions. So the second thing on this list we're going to talk about is UVB coil bulbs. Now, these are obviously sold at pet stores because they're convenient, right? Most reptiles, if not all in the trade, need some form of UVB lighting. Well, why wouldn't you want it in a compact little form? Obviously, that's way better than these large tube fixtures that we're seeing. However, it simply doesn't work that way. See, when we compact them like that, they end up with a very steep UVB gradient, and they really aren't ideal for any animal. This is why UVB tubes are a necessity. So another huge problem we see, and the third thing we're going to talk about, is going to be colored lighting. And by that, I'm specifically talking about the red lights, and I'm sure all of you have seen them. They're typically being pushed towards that nighttime cycle where keep your animals warm at night, use the red light, they can't see them. It's absolute BS. We've learned that most, if not all, reptile species can see that color on the spectrum. They can see red light. It will mess with their circadian rhythm, which is essentially their physical, mental, and behavioral changes over the 24-hour cycle of the day of what they're experiencing. Now, if they see light for 24 hours, obviously that's going to start to affect them mentally, behaviorally, and physically. So why do they still sell them if we've learned and proven that that's simply not true? Well, because it sells, that's why. So we know colored lights are bad. If we need to make our enclosures warm at night, we know to use something like a ceramic heat emitter. Now, could a colored light be used in the daytime, say a red light, a blue light, even a purple light? I guess it could, but why? I don't really see any reason for that. So let's go ahead and stick with our normal basking lights, our normal halogen bulbs. There's no reason to be using colored lights. It's really not fair to these guys. Would you want your entire house to be, I don't know, say green lights all the time? It would get old. So number 4 on this list is going to be dietary supplements. These are something that get pushed pretty hard in the pet stores I've seen around here. I don't know if this is everywhere, but very often I'll see bearded dragon pellets being sold as like a staple food diet. They have all the crude proteins. You can just add water to these until they become soft, and a little bit of iceberg lettuce. I hate that. We'll get into that into a second. But iceberg lettuce, and they're good to go. They could live their lives off of this. It's simply not true. Another thing we see are these little gel-based diets. Not crested gecko like Pangea food, but like gel-based diets for leopard geckos and crested geckos and bearded dragons and iguanas. And I just don't know where it came from, but it sells, so it stays on the shelves. Moving on from that, we see freeze-dried insects all the time. Now, there's nothing really wrong with freeze-dried insects as a whole. However, they can't be the staple diet for these guys. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of nutritional value in something like a cricket to begin with. So we really need to be gut loading those for these guys. When you're freeze-drying something, obviously you cannot gut load them. You've pulled away something that has very little nutritional value and given it even less. They would have to eat an awful lot of something like that. Plus, they do get a little bit of their, their water source from eating. And those are dry. It's overall freeze-dried occasionally, maybe an emergency, but as a staple, absolutely not. Now, I'm going to say this one time, I don't care what pet store tells you this, absolutely nothing on this planet can survive off of iceberg lettuce. No reptile, no human, nothing. And saving the best for last, number 5 is Terrarium Kits. We see these at every single pet store, and they just are never adequate. It's always an undersized tank being sold. The most common one I see is a 40-gallon breeder for an adult bearded dragon. It comes with a UVB coil bulb, not a tube. It's way overpriced. It's advertised specifically for bearded dragons, so it's not us that's getting confused. It's them pushing that agenda. So if you've walked into that pet store and heard about bearded dragons for the first time and you look at that, you're like, oh, this is perfect. This is clearly what that's for. I'm going to buy this. It's got everything it needs for this animal. We're good to go. It's very unfortunate. I hope nobody's doing that. I hope you're looking on YouTube or something, for example, and finding videos such as this and learning about these things before you ever walk into a pet store looking for an animal. But it happens. It happens all the time, and this is how these animals get stuck in these situations. And the reason they do it is because it's a really fast way for them to sell you a lot of BS. You're going to end up buying a lot of junk, a lot of stuff you're not going to use, a way undersized tank for the animal you've purchased. You're going to end up basically having to replace everything you just bought. So it's a huge loss on your end, a huge gain on their end, and it's just very unfortunate for the animal, for you, for everyone involved except for the store. Keep in mind, at no point in this video am I trying to support pet stores if that wasn't obvious. When I talk about the fancy animals, for example, I'm not saying go out and buy animals from a pet store. I much prefer you go to something like a Reptile Expo or buy from a reputable breeder either locally or online and have them shipped to you. I just wanted to go over this video and talk about some of the things that they do to scam you out of some of your money, or some of the reasons really why you shouldn't be going to these pet stores. So if you like this video, comment down below, let me know what you think, leave a like, and if you're not already, maybe subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.